and we're coming live with Marvin Henson shortly. So I'm going to bring this onto the stream like this, and I'm going to bring Marvin onto it instead. Hi, Marvin. Can
Hi
you hear
there.
me okay? That's great. You now have a presentation. Off you go. You're live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube.
Okay, thank you very much. And am I able to move these slides forwards, or do I need to ask you
You
to do
should be able to, yes.
that? Okay, so we'll go. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Marvin Henson. My company is Cloud Solutions for Business, and more latterly working with Dave, who's on the call, with something called Marketing for Humans Initiative, which is really all about helping smaller businesses to create a marketing and sales framework, which will continue to work uh, as they concentrate on what they do best, which is their core business. So I think I'm going to need to ask you to move to the next slide, if I can.
Okay, no worries. There you go.
One of the things I want to position, first of all, is the fact that all of us don't want to be sold to until we're ready to buy. And the reason for that is that about 60% of a customer's decision is made before you even know that they're actually looking to buy something. So next slide, Peter. So what I wanted to do with this session really is to help you feel a bit more comfortable with the sales process, and you'll see I've crossed that out and renamed it customer nurturing, which is what we like to call that these days. And the points I'm going to cover off are sales process. Is it all wrong? Quite often told by marketing gurus or social media gurus that we don't sell anymore. So I just want to look at that and re-examine that, see if that is the case. Persona assumptions, a little bit about awareness and leveling up, and that's about how we dress. Sales and its relationship to marketing, two words used in the same sentence, but actually two different disciplines, but they do cross at certain points. And you'll see that I've crossed out two other words: objection handling and closing the sale. And for those of you who've been on a formal sales training course, will be familiar with both of those terms as they form part of the sales process. I find them quite combative as terms. So I like to rename objection handling as areas of concern that a customer might have as to why they don't buy from us. And closing the sale really is, and this is a question I get quite regularly, about when to ask for the business, when's a good time. So without further ado, I want to go to the next slide, if I may. And introduce you to my cartoon here, which is on the left-hand side is what I would class as a rookie salesperson. Somebody that's really approaching their customers on the basis of like to buy, in this case, some wheels. They can see that potential client's got some challenges. And of course, they'll be fobbed off by the customer by suggestions like, no thanks, we're too busy, all that sort of good stuff. So next slide, please. Are you hearing me okay? Yeah. Okay. Not being perturbed, this individual really will perhaps make the next move, which is, are you sure these wheels are really, really good and they're round? So he's developing the process of perhaps evolving to talking about the features and the advantages. And he knows that that particular customer is going to have a real challenge ahead of them. Bringing those rocks up that hill with square wheels is no mean feat. And he knows they're going to be in pain, they're going to be exhausted, and they're going to be late home again tonight. So next slide, please. So I'm going to ask you to remember that slide, perhaps till the last slide of the few that we've got here. So let's go back and visit then the sales process or nurturing process. And is it all wrong? For those of you who have done a sales course, or you perhaps read the books, you'll know that there are actually 7 stages of the sale. Some sales trainers will talk about 5, some will talk about 6. There's actually 7. And the one that perhaps we all don't particularly like is the very first one, which is called prospecting. And it's probably the most important one, because without customers, finding potential customers, we don't have a business. So stage one is about prospecting. Stage two really is about engaging with a potential client who's expressing an interest in what we do. And part of the next part of the process is really to try and have a conversation to uncover what challenges that customer's got, what is it that's of interest to them that they think we can do to help. And then the next one, which is the salesy bit that we quite often see, and a classic example is, we've all seen these characters. You go to a networking meeting, you'll chat to them and you'll say, well, what is it you do? And then it all comes out, all of the features about their business, all of the advantages, and very little conversation about what you do as a potential customer. So they're presenting their solution, their FABs, as it were, the features and their advantages, probably not likely the benefits, because they don't know anything about you at that point. And that's really when it becomes real salesy. So we kind of need to back off from that and open it into a two-way discussion. And I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but it's important if we don't want to appear too salesy. The next part of that process is objection handling, and closing the sale is the next phase after that. And again, as I said earlier, I find that a bit combative. And in fact, if we do the first 4 parts of the sales process correctly, then there aren't any objections to handle, and there's no need to close the sale, because ultimately you can assume that if you're giving the customer a solution to their problems, what is there not to buy? You know, they'd be interested in dealing with you. And the final one there you can see is ask for a referral. So you'll see I've also bracketed ABCs, and this is usually a term called always be closing, and is often trained by very zealous, overzealous trainers, sales trainers, saying that you should always be closing. I don't know if anybody identifies with that. Heard that before?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And just to give you an example of that, there's a technique called sharp angle closing, which Peter might be familiar with, having come from the sales background, where somebody may be presenting something to you, and they say, well, and of course we do it in blue, and the customer then turns around and says, well, actually, do you do it in red? And the sharp angle on that is, well, if we do it in red, are you going to buy it from us? That is manipulative, it's pushy, and it's too salesy. So we just need to be careful about the way we perhaps work with a customer's objection, as it were. Okay, so next slide, please. So I'd like to introduce you to the next phase. I know we've all done this. We've all worked out who our ideal customers are, the ideal customer persona, customer avatar that we're working towards. And part of that will be the demographics of the individuals that you'll be addressing. So I like to talk about how do we dress ourselves when we're approaching those particular clients. And I don't mean that necessarily physically, although that is important, but also in terms of our textual information, perhaps in the text. We need to make it personal. And we may need to ensure, for example, that somebody like King Charles, if you were meeting King Charles for the first time, would you be dressed in ripped jeans and a t-shirt that says "Rock Me, Baby"? You know, probably not. You know what I mean? It's one of those situations. We might be, in my case, it would probably be, I'd be dressed physically in a suit, shirt and tie, shiny shoes maybe. And the way I would address him is very short questions, short conversation. And if you ask me any questions, it would be short and accurate answers. No fluff, you know, around that. It's got to be accurate. We know he doesn't suffer fools gladly. However, if your next click, if you would. However, the next person that you might, oh, sorry, you need to go back one. Okay, we're not going to get the graphic on this, I'm afraid. But the next one in line would be Ozzy Osbourne, who happens to sit in the same demographic. He's male too. He was born in 48, raised in the UK, married twice, lives in a castle, and is wealthy and famous. Now that might be different. You may want to have that meeting in ripped jeans and a t-shirt, or it may be smart casual. But if you turned up in a suit, that might be too salesy for him. And if you spoke in the same way, very short term, and very specific answers, again, for him, it might be too salesy an approach. So next slide, please. So with that in mind, and talking about the sales relationship to marketing, what I'd like to explore is the following. So again, next slide, please. Right, this is, okay, I would reveal this normally bit by bit, but part of the thing that we do on Marketing for Humans is to explain the buyer's journey. And Peter Bayliss, who is the third party in our group, talks very, very well about how do we stimulate the interest of a potential client to get them onto the buyer's journey in the first place, from a state of being perhaps cold towards us as a business, and taking them through the engagement process, the educational process, before giving them an offer to buy our product or service, right at the end of that buyer's journey. So he talks about that. Whereas I tend to come from this from the angle of the underpinning of that buyer's journey by using the sales process or nurturing process to support that buyer's journey. And the whole thing about the nurturing is to try and solicit and expand on the customer's pain points. We all know that. And we know that from marketing gurus and social media contacts that we have, they talk about content, and content is king, providing information to that customer. And Dave, who's on the call today, talks about answering their frequently asked questions during that provision of content. And it's a really good way to think about it. And what I mean by that is when somebody's on the buyer's journey, because they're thinking about, and we all do this, I'm sure, is this product going to help me? Who are these people? How credible are they? Who are their competition? What price is it going to be? All those sorts of questions. And if we can provide the content, whether it is in the form of email, a website, a meeting, face-to-face on Zoom, if we can provide the answers in that content, it can really, really help. But we have to be just a little bit cognizant that it can appear too salesy. And the way to get around that and tip that from salesy to consultancy and support in that buyer's journey is really to ask, pose and answer the should be asked questions that a customer should be asking, both of you as the supplier. And if you're really clever and those questions are clever and the answers to which will be the unique benefits of dealing with you, then it does mean that if they are looking at the marketplace, other people to provide services like yours, then hopefully the answers aren't going to be the same as yours, and therefore you'll be appearing to be unique to them, and therefore have to do business with you. It's called creating a market dominating position. So if we then think about those questions and the answers to those questions, we can position them in such a state that we can perhaps pre-handle the areas of concern or objections a customer might bring up later in their decision-making process. And we can pre-handle those in a number of different ways. We can also look at testing whether that customer is ready to buy yet, look at their state of warmth towards you as a business. And we see that in things like questions that they may be asking you during that journey. So for example, do you do that in blue? What's the delivery time scale? All of that sort of thing. And in which case you can respond to that quite positively and ask back, if we can do this within your 2 weeks time scale, are you happy to move forward with business with us? If you're not getting the feedback, a good way of generating that that interest is to ask the questions. from the information we provided, you know, are you happy with what we provided so far, or do you have any questions? Should hopefully bring back those questions and determine whether they are ready to do business with you, or whether they're not quite ready yet and you need to provide more information. So that's probably giving you as much as I can give you on this in the time frame. So next slide, please. So I've got a couple of final thoughts for you here. Two rookie mistakes that people do tend to make, and again, I blame sales trainers for this, because there are two questions they tell you to ask. Is the person you're talking to the decision maker, or are they an influencer? And the inference is, if they're not the decision maker, then don't waste your time with them. And I find categorically that not to be the case. Quite often the decision maker will get somebody else to do the legwork for them, do the research for them. So rather than ask the influencer, are they going to place an order, and keep repeating that question, which can appear extremely frustrating and salesy, a better question might be positioned as, are you happy with what you've seen? And if so, will you introduce me to the decision maker? And it's a much softer way of doing things to make that intro. And do they have budget is the other question. And if you're anything like me, when you're buying something, I've never got budget. And there's two reasons I say that for a customer, for a supplier, is that one, it's protection for me from having to make a decision right now, which is what they always ask you. And secondly, that if I like the product or service enough, I'll get the budget from somewhere else. So never be put off by the fact that you're not talking to a decision maker and that they haven't got budget right now. That needs to be qualified further. And of course, the other thing is, and we've all heard the term before, we've all got two ears and one mouth. So we should be listening twice as much as we talk, which is difficult for me right now. And ask open questions, but the right sorts of open questions, because that can really reveal a lot about their business challenges. So asking what's going on in their world gets you away from that constantly talking about your business, and asking them more about theirs. It shows an interest, it shows the consultancy aspect. Questions around what's happening in your world with regard to trends, regulation, competition, what's your biggest challenge, will reveal an awful lot more than you really telling them all about what you do. And then finally, relate the product benefits that you have to those issues that they reveal to you. And that way it becomes a much more targeted approach to that customer. And just for those people that have been on a sales training course before and are familiar with FABs, feature, advantages and benefits, I don't subscribe to that, to be honest. I turn that round and call it BAF. Concentrate on the BAFs, the benefit first, then the advantage, then the feature after that. And it helps me with things like email headers. So when you're doing an email header, the most important factor is that heading and what it says. So put the benefit first to the customer, as it were, and never assume, of course. And if we can have the next slide, which is my last but one slide, that approach to those customers might be somewhat different by the rookie sales guy now. It might be, would you like to arrive home earlier, less exhausted and without the aches and pains? If so, why not trade in your old wheels for the new high-speed round version? And that probably is an example of a BAF in play. So benefits first, get home early, less exhausted and without the aches and pains. Remove an objection, or go towards removing an objection of no budget by talking about trading your old wheels for the new high-speed round version, which is, again, feature and an advantage. All done in reverse, but might get a better response from customers and is less salesy. So, last slide, Peter. If any of you want to talk to me offline, please do so. These are my channels of engagement. Call me, go on my website and send me a mail, and happy to talk to you. So thanks very much, Peter, for allowing me to do that. And back
Thanks,
to you.
Marvin. I will free the screen up. Hold on a second. So we've got you all back.
Yeah.
I'll just put this into play as well, which is that. So that's kind of cool. We've got a few minutes. Round of applause, please, Marvin.
Thank you.
Questions, please.
Whoa, no questions.
Well,
I'm out of here.
Dawn, I'll put this in the polite way. You've been involved in this arena for quite a while, haven't you?
Yeah, and that was triggering quite a few scenarios in my head over the years. So it'd be interesting to know what your, I suppose, for want of a better phrase, what was the most awkward moment that you've had in a sales process, and what did you do to actually sort of smooth your way through?
Most awkward and most memorable was selling a £500,000 upgrade of telephone systems for Bass Group, where I met with the senior buyer. And to say that the lady concerned was icy is an understatement. And I'd taken my boss along with me. We sat at the desk. We did the presentation. We went through all the information. Some really seriously tricky questions, which we did answer. It wasn't going anywhere, and to be honest, I was very close to packing up my case and trying to call the meeting to an end. And I just noticed on the corner of the desk was a picture. It was a picture of a cat, no family on there, just a picture of a cat, and it was a British blue. And I happened to say to her, "That's interesting. I didn't realise. Are you interested in British blue cats?" And she said, "I am. Why do you ask?" I said, "I've got one called Eric." And she said, "Really?" And the ice melted. You could physically feel the room change. And she called a colleague in to make us a coffee, which she'd not offered us at the beginning. And the bottom line of that story is we had a conversation about British blue cats. At which point, for a little while, I said, just getting back to the subject we were here for, are you prepared to do business with them? And she said, "Okay, let's get together and get the paperwork done." That was a £500,000 deal on the back of capital. And that's a true story.
Bonkers, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a great example before building though, isn't it? It's about understanding the people that you're sitting in front of, and sometimes you can have a sales meeting or a business meeting that you don't get to talk about what you actually went to talk about in the first place. You kind of just talk about the individuals and in common interests and family and all the pictures that surround them in the background, and then go back second time and have that discussion next time round, sort of thing. But yeah.
There's also a lot of assumptions made as well. As I said earlier on, I've been involved in sales training, sales coaching for a number of years on and off in BT. And sometimes you can find that sales process, if you stick to it too rigidly, you can actually talk yourself into a sale and then out of it again by following it. So, somebody might just go on your website today, they've seen what products you do, have one conversation, and that's right for me. Somebody else might take a lot longer to make that decision. You just have to be cognizant of that.
I thought it was useful what you were saying about the, in that penultimate slide about declaring the budget, because I find that's often quite a frustrating dance between prospect and supplier, in that it's a two-way street, because if you don't know anything about their budget, you don't know how to tailor something, because I don't just offer one service, none of us do. But then they're always fearful that if they give any indication they've got dosh in the bank, that you're going to go for the premium kind of hard sale. So
the way I handle that, because I'm a big believer of price up front, for a number of reasons. One is you'll determine very quickly if there's a sharp intake of breath test, if that means anything to you. People will just say, "Whoa, wow." But I had a conversation yesterday with a company called Dark Trace, who are a cyber company, and I asked them the price of the product up front, and they went through that dance as you suggest. Well, there's so many variables. Okay, so give me an idea of price for a 5-user system. Just give me an example of it, so I can at least say to a client, caveated, that typically the price would be X for 5 users using this kind of service. And that way it gets rounded. You're giving the price up front, you're giving an example. It's not going to be their price necessarily, but it's an example. And it gets that out of the way quickly.
I think the other thing is that it can go both ways. The event I was at last week, there was a stand, very, very nice people, very good what they do, and what they provide really is a Rolls-Royce service. And a lot of people in the room weren't up in the market for a Rolls-Royce. You know, they were up for whatever, you know, an Octavia or something. You know, there's nothing wrong with that, but they were mismatching. So what they done was they produced a gold, silver, bronze, if you like.
Yeah.
And they were coming out with it very quickly, and because they'd come over from America, they're very much of an American style, dealing with classic UK, where we don't tell anybody that they're too expensive. We say we're not going to make the decision right now. What it really means is you're too expensive, because we're British. And they laid those prices out really quickly, but what they didn't do was qualify and say, well, what's the average probable investment from the people in the room likely to be? In which case it might have been cleverer to come up with another package which they knew full well had got a great chance of doing some business. But the Brits, being the Brits that we are, we weren't saying that. It was an international group of people. The only people who I saw actually just go bang were the South Africans. And they, stereotypically, they were straight between the eyes and said it's far too expensive. We wouldn't pay that. But at least they knew where they were.
Absolutely.
You know, it's a dance. It is a dance.
Yeah. I think it's the only way you can do it is to gauge on you know, or quite often have a loss leader price in your mind at the beginning. You know, there was some years ago on phone systems, there used to be a question mark around, how much is it for a phone system for 10 users? And you whatever the price was at the time, you know, £15 per user per month. And you would always get somebody that's, it's far too expensive. The flip side of that was, well, I can provide you a phone system for nothing. Would that suit? It would. So the call price is 5 pence, you know, or whatever it is per minute per call. And you know, for some people that's quite fine. You know, they're prepared to pay because they make very few calls. So there's different ways of handling it. But no, I don't like to avoid it, because that just it gives a feeling of mistrust. You're trying not to give a price, and so I like to be price up front if I can. Sorry, long answer.
Other questions? I'm mindful of time. We've probably got a couple of minutes left. Or any just other thoughts that you've found over time? I can give you the longest silence that I ever did, by the way, if you want that. Everybody knows in sales training, you know, there's a point where you have to stay quiet, because whoever talks next is the win. Well, the longest silence for me was 22 minutes. And that was when we was in corporate land, and that was we'd put a pilot together with a major organization, and we had a board presentation to make, and there were 5 of them, so I matched off 5 of us, although 3 of them literally were just, you know, I grabbed them and said, you're coming with me, to match them off. And we presented what I knew was very sketchy information, but I also knew it was information that they couldn't get. This is going back a long time. Information at that point they just couldn't get hold of, and I knew they needed it. And it was a question of, I knew they needed it and how much they wanted it. And I presented it all. And in those days, I was well known for standing up and giving a lot of blah, blah, blah at the appropriate points. And then I stayed stum, and they were literally, everybody was sitting next to me. They were tapping my legs. So, say something. And I was just going quiet, let them digest what we've given. And it was 22 minutes, because I actually looked at the clock. And I knew whoever spoke next would be the case. And eventually they came out with the words can you get more of this information for us? And I knew I'd won. And that was the start of a 38 million turnover business, believe it or not. All because of 22 minutes silence, not because I'm clever. Far from it. I was terrified, but I just wasn't showing it. That was all. I was doing the super smooth corporate bit with it. Yeah, it's fine, everybody. But inside, I was thinking, oh my God,
it is quite interesting though. These little tidbits as well, like that. Staying quiet. Once you've asked the question, there's just so many of them that's like that. So I think that's a really good 22 minutes is a long time.
I mean, anybody who knows me knows that normally I would have filled that space, but I knew I had to, so, I was thinking of everything I could just to not open my mouth. But I mean, I think the important thing is that you allow people time to digest what you've said. The biggest danger is you keep going blah, blah, blah. And it's just the same as with speaking. You need to let people digest what you're saying. And if that means that it's silent for a bit, Steve Parker would say on the radio show he does on a Friday, to be comfortable in the silences. And it's true. At times you've got to be comfortable with that and just let people digest. And then they'll speak when they're ready.
Yeah. I'll give you a throwaway tip on the purchasing side of the fence. Little tip given to me by somebody at Allied Breweries. I used to deal with the Allied Breweries. Is that when somebody does give you a price, no matter what that price is, always say, how much? Quiet. And it's amazing how they suddenly start to give you a discount. You've not asked for one, and they'll just give it.
Yes, yeah. And if you know that trick, then you say, yes, isn't that inexpensive?
Yeah, because it can be. How much is it really that cheap?
Yeah,
you can say yes. Not necessarily the other way.
The other trick is to expose the fallacy sometimes of the question. When you offer quite a nuanced set of products or services and they say how much, just say, yeah, between 200 quid and £5,000, and just let them digest that. And then, we start getting more interesting, nuanced conversations about what it is they actually want.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm conscious of time. I like to try and keep it to about 30 minutes. So again, round of applause to Marvin, please. Thank you very much indeed for that. I'm sure that's made everybody think a little bit. So what we're going to do now is say goodbye to everybody that's listening to this recording. You've got the contact details for Marvin there, and obviously for the family business practice. And we're going to go away and talk quietly amongst ourselves for half an hour, which is what we do inside the family business practice. But for everybody watching this now, I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you need to know any more information, either get hold of us, get hold of me, or get hold of Marvin, and we'd love to chat with you. And I will say goodbye on this broadcast now.